Biggest what ifs in college football this year. Got one for you. If Michigan makes it 4 in a row against Ohio State, what happens? What is the fallout? So there goes the Richter scale off the charts. But then what's the aftermath? Well, number one, it would be a disaster in Ohio State. It would be a disaster. There's this weird thing in college football that's both beautiful and terrifying, and that is the impact and the weight of rivalry games. And it's on no bigger display than in this game right here. This game is its own season. Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan, the game. It's its own season. And I love that. And I hate that that could be eroded somewhat with the new postseason structure and the new conference championship structure, but that's down the road. As for the game, I love that. But it's a nightmare if you lose it, because you could otherwise have had a really good year. Ohio State could go 11-0 into that game, and they lose it. They may still be in the conference title game if they lose it. They're absolutely going to be in the playoff even if they lose it, but yet there's this hole in the spot where your heart and soul is supposed to be in your chest, and that game means so much. I'm not even sure that winning the rest of your games fills it, which is an interesting case study, by the way. 2 years ago, this could have happened. They lose to Michigan. They make the playoff. They're a field goal away from beating Georgia, which would have punched their ticket to the national title game to play TCU. They probably beat TCU. They would have won the whole thing. But they would have known they weren't able to go through Michigan to do it. It's just a weird dynamic. It's beautiful, but it's also really, really violent when you end up losing that thing. If they lose 4 in a row for Ohio State, it would be a pretty unprecedented conversation happening around Ryan Day. And there would be, here's this word again, there would be logic, and then there would be applying it to an illogical situation. And if Ohio State loses to Michigan, I don't care what they did elsewhere in the season, it will be an illogical conversation for Ryan Day from that point out. As for Sharon Moore, if they come in a year where they should lose to Ohio State, now earmuff yourself if you're in Ann Arbor. Outside of Michigan, pretty much everyone would be in agreement that if you look on paper, FanDuel included, if you look on paper, this should be Ohio State's year. Buckeyes got to get it this year. Yeah, but here's the thing. It's looked that way on paper the last few years, and they haven't. So paper, there's a reason they've never played that game on paper. If they got it done this year, Alex Orji, new at quarterback, whole staff's new, lost a ton from last year. If that defense really does come through and gives that offense time to gel, and they go into Columbus in late November and they win that thing, the legend of Sharon Moore. Talk about writing a storybook beginning to a career. So that's the first thing I'm what-ifing. Another thing I'm what-ifing. What if the ACC and the Big 12 only have one playoff team each from their conferences? So they're conference champions. And then that's it. That's all. How would you feel about that? It probably means, well, it obviously means that no truly elite tier 1 really formed in either of those conferences. I think it also means the college football playoff committee probably ended up heavily valuing strength of schedule, strength of record, and they tilted the table in favor of SEC, Big Ten teams. You probably saw teams with a worse record in those conferences get in over ACC teams with a better record, or certainly Big 12 teams with a better record. That probably happened. Notre Dame probably made it in, I would think. G5, maybe 2 G5 teams made it in for all I know. The Big Ten and the SEC got a ton of teams in. And then think of the individual stories. If this were to go down this way, did Clemson make it in? Are they the ACC's participant? And if they're in and Florida State's out, how did that happen? And if they're in and Miami's out, how did that happen? Or maybe Miami's the one that's in. And FSU and Clemson both got left out of a 12-team playoff. Or maybe Florida State's in the thing. And maybe Clemson just put up an 8-win season. And maybe Miami couldn't take all that talent acquisition and translate it to on-field success. No matter which combination there, if you've only got one team in, then you got big problems elsewhere. And that's not even to mention the possibility that a Virginia Tech could emerge or an NC State could emerge, and all the big three there, Florida State, Clemson, Miami, they're all three left out. The Big 12, it's a little easier to see. I think most of you would guess one Big 12 team will make it in, but in the ACC, that'd be a bitter pill to swallow. Third what if here. Let's go to Kansas for a second. By the way, they hit me up yesterday and invited me back up there. When we did the Pate State Speaker Series, we drove right through Lawrence to go to Manhattan to interview Chris Kleiman, and we loved our visit there. I didn't hear from anyone at Kansas. Well, we have heard from Kansas. So we may have to get up there in the not too distant future because they're doing big time renovations. Anyway, as for this year, what if Jalen Daniels is healthy at quarterback and he puts up big numbers at Kansas? This has been a big question for them. And I was listening to Lance Leipold, head coach there. He was talking at Big 12 Media Days and talking about how much better a team they are with him than without him. Now, Leipold said, I love our quarterback depth. I love our quarterback room. Well, I don't. He knows his team better than I do. I don't love their quarterback room. I love him. I love that number one they have. And if he's healthy, total game changer in the Big 12. Because if he's healthy, they return their top 3 wide receivers. Devin Neal's back at running back, one of the best returning running backs in the conference. They're a potential college football playoff team if they've got a healthy Jalen Daniels. They also, when you look at their schedule and you look at the FanDuel odds to win the Big 12, this is one of the stats I like to follow personally. They play 7 of the bottom 8 teams in the FanDuel odds to win the Big 12. Those aren't the end-all, be-all, and those certainly won't pan out on paper in that exact order. But for broad strokes purposes, if you're talking about workable schedules versus tougher schedules, Kansas, with that quarterback and that returning talent and that offense with that schedule, total game changer. So those are some of the what-ifs I've got my eye on in the sport this fall.